Hey everyone, how are you doing? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say. And in this video, I have encounters with cryptids of all shapes and sizes here, including one of what could be a race of people that live in caves deep under the earth. So, if that sounds like something you're interested in, definitely pull up a stump and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. This didn't happen to me, it happened to my father, and he's told this story many times over the years, and nothing changes. It's always the same, every detail, so I'm inclined to believe him. So, my father was 16 or 17 years old when this happened. He was living in a rural town in Castile, Spain. One of his friends recently found a cave. He said he wants to go explore it. My dad is excited. Of course he wants to go explore a cave. So they walk out to where it is and arrive at the entrance. The entrance is rather big, but afterwards the tunnel gets smaller and they have to crouch down to continue exploring. So after some walking into the tunnel, it starts gradually increasing in size, and they can stand up straight and walk again. He says after this they walked for 10 minutes, and it's just a tunnel that goes deeper and deeper into the earth. My dad starts feeling some weird vibes. Something is off, not normal. He doesn't say anything to his friend because he doesn't want to appear as being a scaredy cat, so they keep walking. Eventually they reach a cavern in this cave, a quite big one. In one corner they see a man just lying on the ground. They say, "Hello?" There's no response. They get a bit closer. They check him over. He's sleeping. The man is unnaturally pale, like milk white. His hair is long enough to reach his knees. At first, they thought that he was a hobo, but he has all white clothes, and they're pristine in condition. He looks like he has good hygiene, and the man also has lots of solid gold jewelry on him. The man starts to wake up, and he stands up and stretches. He's like 3.5 meters tall, which is around 12 feet for Americans, most likely more. He says something in a language that they don't understand. He doesn't seem hostile, but my dad and his friend still freak out, and they rush for the exit. The man laughs as though he found it funny. Both my dad and his friend spend the rest of the day and the entire next day thinking about it. They decide they have to go back, but the entrance is no longer there. And not only that, but where they found the entrance to the cave, it looks like there was never a cave there. They talk with the locals about it. No one's ever heard of a cave in that location. So, what the hell did they find? So I had this one experience that was really weird. I was a teenager, and it was the summertime. Me and my best friend at the time decided that we wanted to go out hunting, and we decided to go a way that we hadn't been before. So after walking for a few miles, we come to a clearing. We're walking in the clearing because there's a little bit of a breeze. There's no breeze underneath the trees. The clearing seems to be in the shape of a backward 7. It's about 100 yards wide, and it's a couple 100 yards long before the turn. As we enter the turn, we hear this strange buzzing noise, and it gets louder and louder. And once we go around the turn, we can see the rest of the clearing. 50 or so feet ahead of us, in the rest of the clearing, is 50 or more dead cattle. Millions of flies everywhere, all over the summer-bloated corpses. We were upwind, so until we got close, we couldn't smell the dead rot. We decide to GTFO because we don't know what the hell killed that many cattle or who or what put them there. We cut through the woods to go around the bodies. A little ways past the bodies, we find this road path that cuts through the woods. After some thinking and reading signs, we kind of figured out a good idea where we were, and we eventually got back home using that road. I get back to my buddy's home. I tell his dad. The dad calls the sheriff department to report it. They say that they'll have to come out in the morning to take a look. The next morning, they come by and get us, so we can show them where everything was. We get back to the clearing from the road by following the road path through the woods. All the bodies are gone. The only reason they believed us was the blood and fluids were left behind on the grass, and there were tons of flies still everywhere, and the smell was still extremely prevalent. What really worried me later was realizing that whoever or whatever moved the cattle did so because they saw us back there and watched us. It makes me glad that we were armed when I think back on it. I live out near Texarkana. My parents have a farm with a few cows, some horses, and too many chickens to count. This farm sits on the boundary between woods and plains. Trees are sparse, but thicken up like crazy toward the back of the property. My parents are gone to Corpus Christi for vacation, so of course, I have to take care of all the animals. And on top of that, tack on a heat wave passing through. And it's basically constant care, making sure they're watered and stuff. My closest friends are out of town for the week, and the farm is about 20 miles outside of city limits, so getting a Tinder date is probably out of the roster of activities. I split up time between feeding the animals and sighting in my new SIG 556 I got for graduation. I wake up one morning. One of the older horses had passed away. She had plenty of water, but the heat must have just been too much for her, the poor thing. I phone my dad. He tells me to go to my neighbor Frank, a few miles down the road. He has a backhoe. I go to Frank and tell him my situation. He follows me back home with the thing and fills me in on how to operate it. Not too different from a tractor, so I'm pretty much set. He tells me that he'll be back the next morning for the backhoe. I set to work on digging Empress's grave. I fill it in, offer a moment of silence, and I shed a manly tear. And as I'm doing this, I'm hit with an inspiration. I turn the backhoe back on and I chug-a-lug to the back of the property. 30 acres, and not a single berm for shooting. To me, this is madness. I don't bother telling my parents because they probably wouldn't care anyways. So I start digging a berm. I leave the trench on the forest side. Suddenly, I smell this dank odor. I kind of panic a little bit and think that I hit a sewer line, and think, oh, if that's the case, I'm definitely going to get it. I hop down out of the cab and I search the trench for a busted pipe, but there's none to be found. Suddenly I'm feeling uneasy, the feeling of being watched or stalked. I scan the tree line and the surrounding field. I chalk it up to the dead horse and the residual guilt, but I still kinda feel a little uneasy and I go back to the backhoe. I'm pretty glad that I got it left running, if for anything, just to get out of the area that many seconds sooner. So I chug-a-lug back to the farm, I turn it off, and I head inside. Fast forward to the next morning. I get up pretty early, and I make a big country breakfast for myself, and I go out to feed some critters. I go out to do the horse's routine, but with one less chunk of hay in the wheelbarrow, and this makes me kinda sad. Suddenly, I waft that same unpleasant vapor, but this time it's mixed with something else. Rot. I head out on a hunch to where I buried Empress. I stagger and nearly puke. The grave has been robbed. Her head has been placed, emphasis on placed, upright, near a largish hole in the ground. Her tongue has been ripped out, her eyelids are gone, and the eyes have been popped. Her cheeks and neck look like they've been chewed on. There's maggots crawling around the wounds. I've seen dead animals and scavenging before. This trumps all in my book. Plus, this is more so disturbing to me because I loved that horse, so it hit me on another level. I hear a squealing sound behind me, and I brick in my shorts, but it's my neighbor Frank. He asks why I look so pale. I tell him that coyotes dug up the horse, which I know is BS. I dug that grave at least 7 feet deep. He nods and leaves with the backhoe. I play car shuffle again to get him back to his truck. I get home. I carefully tip Empress's head back down in the grave with a shovel, and I rebury her. I go into the garage and I slop some coyote urine around the grave just to keep them away. It pays to have a family as into hunting as mine. Now fast forward to that afternoon. I head out on a four-wheeler with a few targets, my SIG and my Nagant. Trashy? Yes. Cheap? Also yes, but still fun, for a little sight calibration. I go to set up the targets, and I realize that I didn't bring anything to actually set them up on, and I'm kicking myself at this point. I go into the trees and grab some sticks. As I approach, I get that same feeling as the day before. I go into the trees and grab what I think are suitable sticks, and then I do that little nope scoot back to my site. I whittle the sticks into stakes, makeshift a few targets into the side of the berm. I get my SIG calibrated to within an acceptable parameter, and I operate on the clean target for a few minutes with the Nagant. After a while, I realize it's getting dark. At this point, I decide it's time to take my targets and stuff down, clean up my brass, and head back. I was in Boy Scouts of America, so I'm still into the leave no trace type thing. As I'm taking the targets down, the afternoon breeze shifts, and suddenly that stank is there again. I hear movement from the other side of the berm, and I stand there, wide-eyed. I decide that I shouldn't run this time. I grab my SIG and I climb the berm to have a little peek. I see a medium-sized black shape huddled down in the trench. At first, I figured it's a black bear cub or something. They're more common than some folks realize, and I back away slowly in case Mama's nearby. As I'm backing away, I clumsily ham-hand some dirt and I shower it onto this, quote, cub. It looks up at me. It's not a cub. And let me just say, while I'm not like a badass person or anything like that, spooky images or creepy images don't really frighten me that easily. When I was little, one of my favorite pets, named Delightful, was an older Welsh pony with no eyes. Her eye holes were in fact sewn over and sunken in. She made one of my friends cry just by looking at him. That being said, this thing was on a completely other level, another spectrum and set of physics from that sweet old pony. The best way I can describe it is comparing it to Razar from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but the jaw was thinner, the eyes were beadier and darker, and the nose was more sunken back. But the rest of the details are still pretty close. The same drooly mouth, the same slack-jawed grin, the same snargly-ass teeth. At this point, my brain made an executive order to re-examine my previous decisions. Screw the targets, screw the brass, screw the scouts, and screw not being a scaredy cat, and screw slow going. I am tipping the hell out of here. I tactically run back to the ATV, and I spend about a fraction of a second making sure my guns are stowed securely, and I gun that shit back to the garage. Once inside, with a good 8 acres between me and this beast, I realize that I have a sworn duty to protect my farm. I already let one of my charges die under my watch. It's time to nut up or shut up. I grab my dad's tack vest that I have to cinch to make it a little tighter. I grab his night owl, and I grab an AR-15 with two 20-round mags, loaded with 5.56 NATO rounds. I slap another one into my SIG, and I sling my new gun over my shoulder. I even channeled that scene from Rambo 2 where he puts the knife in his boot. There are floodlights strung up about the farm for entertaining or for night work. The switches are in the garage and the balcony. Not a moment too soon, I start hearing squawks and gurgles, and I still get the heebie-jeebies to this day, hearing laughter coming from the chicken pen. I slam every switch and I light up the farmyard like Rockefeller Square on Christmas. There it is, standing in the pen. Its body was shaped like a koosh ball, all matte black fur. The arms and legs were thin, but looked powerful and wiry. It was holding one of the hens with its head torn off and staring straight at me. It was obviously a male of whatever the hell species it was, because there was blood hanging off of its you-know-what down below. I probably should have conserved a bit, but at that point I didn't care. I hurled insults at it, and I mag-dumped it. In that moment I didn't care. I just wanted to hit whatever the hell this black cotton ball on stilts was. I scored at least 5 or 6 good thwacks in my target, only about 50 yards down range. It never moved the entire time, but puffs of fur were flying off of it. I ejected the mag, slapped a new one in, took aim again, and I'll never forget the look it gave me, framed by that green sight. It looked at me like it was saying, "Are you done?" I squeezed off a final shot, and I hit its mouth. I know I hit it. I remember it almost in slow motion. The puff of saliva as my round introduced itself to its face at 3,000 feet per second. The thing started wheezing, like a rusty gate being swung open back and forth. You know the sound. It dropped the hen and stepped over the chicken fence, and I swear that this thing either has to be mostly fur or have like retractable legs, because when it stepped over the fence, its other leg basically disappeared within the big tufts of fur. I wasn't going to let it run away. I tried to shoot it again, but I didn't score any hits. Once it was over the fence, it dropped down to all fours and scuttled off like some kind of giant spider back to the crack of Satan's couch, I don't know, all while wheezing that same noise. I stayed up all night, waiting for it to come back. I fed the animals with my gun over my shoulder. I went to sleep, and I repeated this process until my parents came home. Of course, they wondered what the hell happened, and we never saw that effing shit weasel ever again. I had something terrifying happen to me when I was 14. We were camping with my parents. By we, I mean me and my younger sister. This was at Mount Diablo in California, for anyone that's interested. So we set up camp. The sun goes down. We sit around the fire until 11, I think, just talking, shooting the breeze, all that kind of stuff. My parents are the cool type that understand that teenagers like to experiment with stuff, so they decided if I was going to have alcohol, I should be in their supervision. So they gave me a couple beer, and I got a little bit tipsy. So after another couple hours, they went to bed in their tent. Me and my sister were sharing a tent about 50 feet from them. So I go lay down in the tent and I talk to my sister for a while. I hear this weird sound off somewhere in the woods, a ways away from the tents. I think at first that it was my parents having sex, but it's way too far away, and I realize it's on the opposite side of where they are, closest to us. It sounded almost like nails on a chalkboard, but organic, like a living thing had made it. It's hard to describe. I tell my sister that it's just a deer or something because she's scared. She eventually falls asleep because she's tired, and she had a little bit to drink too, so she falls asleep quite quickly. So I'm laying there, waiting to hear it again. 15 minutes go by. I'm still in my sleeping bag. I can't sleep. I'm not really worried about the sound at this point. My mind is kind of drifting. 30 minutes pass by. I still can't sleep. I think if I just had fallen asleep before the noise, none of this would have happened. As I'm laying there, I start to hear rustling a little ways off. I tell myself that maybe my dad got up to go to the bathroom. It sounds like rustling leaves now, and it sounds like it's up a tree. The sound starts to get really aggressive, like whatever it is trying to take the tree down with it. I realize that it's probably not my dad. Suddenly, everything gets quiet. I sit there. I try to relax. I've been camping for years, hunting for years, and I know what mountain lions sound like. I've heard just about every animal in these California forests, and I still have no idea what could have made the sound I heard then. And then a screech pierces the air, but screech is the only word I have for it. It's really not a good way to describe it. It sounded similar to the nails on a chalkboard sound from before, but 100 times the volume. Not literally, but you get what I mean. And the tone was different. It had that organic, almost raspy quality to it now. My first thought was, what kind of animal made that noise? I sat there starting to freak out, thinking about what animal could possibly be outside my tent. But I didn't want to wake my sister because I knew what would happen. I'd wake her up, she'd hear it, and then she would scream bloody murder and just start crying. So I'm trying not to scare her. But most of all, I don't want to piss off my parents in case it's just something simple. So by this point, I'm definitely 100% sober, and I'm trying to talk myself down, to calm down. Then I decide that if I can't sleep, I'll just wait for sunrise and listen for it. That if anything happens, I'll just go wake my dad. An hour passes. I still feel scared, but I feel brave for not running to my parents at first thing. I get bored eventually, and I start playing my little 20 questions ball thing. If you remember those, hats off to you. While I'm playing it, I hear sounds near the tent, but I think that they're maybe the small animals that come out at night, that maybe the sounds are coming back. But they weren't coming from the trees, so this was a good thing. I keep playing. 30 minutes more pass. I suddenly realize something. The sounds did not come back. It's still dead silence. I peeked my head out from under my sleeping bag. I hear nothing. My heart starts beating really fast, and I get this overwhelming sense of dread. It's cold, but I start sweating. I sit there in unmoving silence for what felt like forever. My ears begin to adjust to the silence. And then I can hear something. It's very quiet, but I can just barely pick it up. I realize I can hear breathing, but it's different. Again, it's in the opposite direction of where my parents' tent is, toward the forest. It's not my sister, and she is under her sleeping bag, and her breathing is different. This breathing sounds like a horse after it runs. Big, deep breaths from a big, big animal, and it's raspy. I started trying to convince myself that all the noises are coming from a hurt deer, but deer don't scream like that. I listen for 5 minutes. My sister snores and I get distracted for a second. I try to hone back in on the sound. It's gone. Everything is just back to dead silence. I'm feeling like the dread isn't going away anytime soon. It's just getting worse. I start fumbling around as quietly as I can for my flashlight, but my hands are all clammy, and I start to smell something weird. It's that death smell from some other stories you read. Everything smells terrible, but it also kind of smells like rotting fish. I'm praying that my dad will smell it and wake up. I try to call out to him, but my throat won't work. I can't even croak, I'm so scared. I hear something close to the tent, like the sound your lips make when you open your mouth loudly. I silently start crying. I find my flashlight, finally. I try to find the balls to turn it on, and then something happens super close to the tent. It was a guttural moan. My only analogy is that it sounded like what huskies sound like when their owners teach them how to say words in those videos. But it was really deep and raspy, and I think, oh crap, I'm gonna die. It starts making the sound over and over again. In the dark, I can kind of see something press up against the tent. It's vaguely face-shaped. I realize it's trying to say something. I tell myself that I'm going to count down from 10 and then turn on my flashlight, and I'm going to book it to my parents' tent. 10. It stops. It's weird talking noise. 9. 8. 7. I'm shaking right now, trying to find the tent zipper. 6. 5. I can still see it pressed up against the tent. I realize that my sister is still asleep. 4. I get out of my sleeping bag. 3. I start to unzip the tent. I look back to where the face was. It's gone. I unzip the tent over the opening, and I run as fast as I can to my parents' tent. I try to scream as loud as I possibly can, but again, nothing will come out. I crash into my parents' tent. My dad yells, "Hey, what the F are you doing?" I grab my dad, hysterical at this point. He must have been able to tell how scared I was because his demeanor changed from angry to concerned. And then he says, "What the hell is that smell?" I can barely speak. I manage to get out, "Face. There's a face out there." I've never seen my dad look scared, but if there was a time he did, this was it. "Where's your sister?" Oh shit, I think. She's still in the tent, and it's open. He loses it. We're both hysterical. I run outside and my dad runs after me. I turn on the flashlight and he grabs it because we're both running toward the tent, but he's faster. My dad starts screaming for my sister. My knees are shaking so bad that I can barely run. He sees the tent. Dad stops and tells me to stay back. He says it might be a rabid animal if it's not scared by us. I can barely whisper, "Dad, it's not an animal." He starts shining the flashlight around the tent and yelling. He says it must be a skunk or something. It smells like poop. I think to myself, skunks don't smell like rot and old fish. But I think he was trying to be brave too. We walk to the mouth of the tent. He calls out, "Are you awake?" talking to my sister. We get closer. It's dark, I use this in the future as a reminder to get a better flashlight. It almost looks like a shadow or something is being casted on the tent. And then we think, wait, there's nothing to be casting a shadow in there. There's a backpack and my sister. I think me and my dad both realize at the same time. His voice is shaky now. He calls out for my sister again. The shadow kind of shudders. My dad turns serious. Whoever's in the effing tent, get the F out right now. He starts running toward the tent. This thing turns around. It's completely black. That's why we thought it was a shadow. But its face was pure white, completely flat, no nose. It had, I guess, what you could call eyes, just vertical slits in its flat face. There was no visible mouth. I'll try to draw a picture. My dad stops dead in his tracks, just shining the light on it. Suddenly, it takes off on all fours and runs back into the woods. It ran almost like a cat when it gets scared. That's the only way I can describe it. My dad's shocked for a second, and then he runs into the tent to check on my sister. We go in, and she's still asleep. How the hell? She says, "Why are you guys yelling? It's the middle of the night." My dad says, "So, you're okay?" We ended up going back to our car. My dad tells my mom that we need to leave right now, and she says, "You're just overreacting. It was probably just a raccoon. I'm not about to drive home in the dark and crash, blah blah blah. She wasn't there, so whatever." I'm still scared, but I'm not, shaking anymore. It's like 2 or 3 a.m. at this point. My dad finally compromises. He says that we can sleep in the car until 6 a.m. Then we are leaving. I get situated, my sister gets situated. Dad is still worried about my sister. She seems fine now and falls asleep in the back, unharmed. My mom and dad can't sleep, so they go back to their tent, but lock the car with us in it. I'm laying on the floor, and I think I'm definitely not sleeping tonight. An hour passes. It's about 4 a.m. now. I'm getting hopeful that whatever it was is gone for the night. And then the smell comes back. It's so much worse. There's no fresh air in the car, and I think I'm going to vomit. I start to hear shuffling on the ground outside. I think to myself, do not look out the windows. Whatever you do, don't look out the windows. My head is near the hinge of the car doors. I can hear something messing with the car. It sounds like something scraping a nail back and forth over the hinge. It's like a scrape, and then a click, and then a scrape again. I close my eyes and tell myself, again, don't look outside. I start hearing this heaving sound. It sounds like a coughing, laughing, and breathing all at the same time, right next to my head. I start crying again. I'm too scared to scream. The moaning starts again, but it turns into a word. Hi. And then it starts saying it. Hi, 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 over and over and over again. I'm trying to call out to my dad. My sister wakes up. She says, "What's going on? Where's Dad?" And then immediately starts screaming bloody murder. My dad stands up out of the tent and says, "It's effing back. Emma, wake up. Please open your eyes. Look at this thing. What the hell is it?" And my sister is just calling for my dad, saying, "Please God help me. Dad, where are you?" And hearing all of this chaos, all of this fear just made me close my eyes tighter and tighter. But whatever happened, they seemed to scare it off, and we left right then and there. My dad came back the next day for our stuff. Another weird thing is that I've gone back to this spot armed and tried to stay the night to see what would happen, and experienced nothing many times. So, yeah, that was my traumatizing experience that still bothers me. And I don't know, it's like if I find it again and I'm able to defend myself this time, maybe the trauma will go away. I don't know. So, what'd you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one, if you had one, down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. I also have a PayPal and a Patreon if that's something that you're interested in as well. And also, shout out if you have an April birthday like me. Mine was just the other day on April the 8th, so happy birthday to me. And if your birthday is in April, happy birthday to you. And with that, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump. Make sure to stay hydrated, wash your hands, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.